As you can see here, it's like I say, it was given in Chicagoland or Naperville this year, and we're doing it here now. And it's the construction methods, and it's for plastic and resin freight cars. And you will follow the build of an IC auto car double door, 33670 throughout the presentation. And of course, you guys have been here a few nights, so you know it's luster Brewer. Anyway, when I assemble a model or build a model, these are the kind of the methods I look at. There's the assembly, the roof, the ends, sides, underbody, and finish. And if you can, you always want photos, obviously prototype. And if you can only get one, try it. The best obvious would be a 3/4, which shows at least the BN. And then if you got a car diagram. In our case, this is the photo of the car. Now, the number you notice will be quite different. These cars, when they were first built, weren't numbered in this series. They eventually got renumbered several times. So you'll see that the number I chose in the end is after the cars were renumbered for the third time. Anyway, so we do have this kit photo is in the kit instructions, and here's a car diagram. I happen to have the IC diagram book, one of them in my collection. So you'll notice if you look quickly, we're not going to look at everything, but in the lower left-hand corner, for example, you see things like you find that the handbrake is a universal on this one. The doors are Youngstown corrugated. Next column on the bottom, the ends are steel dreadnought. And if we went through it, there's all kinds of things, other things you could pick out. But anyway, Resin Car Works in 2024 at the RPM put out this mini kit, which I purchased, and that was their 37 auto cards, the IC. And you have to supply the Intermountain kit, a 408XX. I chose the 99 because it was undecorated, and therefore we're really looking here at a composite kit. Here's the actual kit. The one on the left is the Frank or the Resin Car Works kit. You notice you get the doors, you get the ends done in resin. There's truck frames, which are Tahoe. But and then slightly to the right, you see I had Plano etched ladders, the Tichy thing. Now the big thing about it is, when you start any kit, you got to have a car body, and obviously the Intermountain kit is what's providing that car body and the underframe for this build. Okay, now if you go to the resin world, obviously that car body, and suppose you pick up an old flat kit, you're gonna have to actually build the car body. And I recommend you do it by doing 2Ls. If you see in the upper right-hand corner, that's 1L being assembled with commercial blocks. The one in the lower left, I'm doing it. I had blocks made in a machine shop many years ago with the beveled edges so you can run glue down them. But you don't want to end up, and today, as I've gotten older, out taking Kaufman with their clamp, and it's the Kaufman clamp makes things very easy, and you notice it's open in the back for putting in the CA. And eventually you will end up with the one-piece body like you have up on top at the top left. I also, in a resin kit, you will want to add baffles. Many of the resins, as they age, have a tendency to bow inward. So it's a good idea to put a baffle in there. And it also helps support the floor. Now, also you got to weight a kit, obviously. And you see in the upper left there, we have, branch line trains use nuts in theirs. And by the way, the formula you see is right down in the center. The car we're going to look at, or building, actually is the 5.5 inches. So, and most HO cars are in that range, and so your normal weight form is about 3.75 if you're going to follow the NMRA standard. Of course, if you've ever read any of my things or the blog, I always say 3.8. I figure round it off. In my case, for the build we used for the 33670, I used those stick-on car weights you see in the upper right-hand corner. And if you looked that up on the internet, you'd say, well, gee, that's pretty expensive box. But if you're once you find out the number that's in there, and if you actually do the math, I was in the accounting profession, cost so they really come out to 4 cents a piece is what it is. Of course, for other cars outside of a box car, like you take that gun in the lower left, you can use sheet lead. I used to know two electricians who were model railroaders, so they would save me the electrical punch outs from the boxes, the metal ones. Those are very nice because they actually weigh 2 grams a piece. So they're excellent for weighting cars. The other thing on the lower right, you see if you're going to glue uh, a metal to resin on a resin kit or plastic, I for resin you could use CA, but I still use silicone, the RTB silicone, and the reason being is I find I've been running a railroad operating since about '74, and I find that CA after time even can give way inside a car. Silicone never will do. Anyway, we got to have a car body. You see, you have a resin one on the left, and our car, which we're putting together, the Intermountain car body. We've now put the Intermountain roof on, and we have put the resin ends from the mini kit on there. Also, you notice I add trucks and couplers right away. Many modelers do not, but I want them on the car when I do the weight, which was done before the roof was added, because otherwise the car is gonna be overweight, or if you want it that way, that's fine. However, car bodies are not always this easy as this was. Sometimes you're going to want to maybe just change an end. The end is not correct. So, I, if you're going to have to do something like that, and I recommend you purchase that saw. It's down in the bottom. The UMM USA. I have a tendency to call it the USA, but anyway, it's a great saw. The kerf is just incredibly small. Most of the time you use it, you don't have to do any sanding. Uh, so that is what I recommend. In the upper right, it's just usually being used to cut off a door guide. But if for like a car end here, you could lay down tape, masking tape, painter's tape, and use that saw. Back to the lower right, real quick. You notice you got to spend a few bucks for the UMM USA saw. But you notice if you look carefully at where the blade holder is, it has two screws. The cheap knockoff down below has only one screw, and you see the broken blade right away on the bottom. That is a common occurrence because that blade wobbles in the single type screw saw. Anyway, another problem with a car body might be you have to change the roof. And if you're going to do that, I use the Dremel tool, which runs at about 5,000 RPM with the saw blade, as you see, excuse me, which has a very, very fine cutting curve too. The teeth per inch, I do not know the number. I purchased these blades years ago from the tool man who is no longer in business. The other thing you'll run in many of the old kits, Westerfield has started to, if you do an old resin kit, Westerfield used to have to, and many of them, they were flat roofs. And one I recently just picked up in Chicago has this type of old roof where you have to put in the ridge pole and the rafters. Like I say, if Westerfield, he's now basically replaced in his kits all this type with a new single piece roof with the proper angles. Then also, I mean, the absolute, if you're trying to get the correct ends in the roof, you might want to do it via casting. And I do that when I find it necessary to do so. And if you don't want to do casting or don't do casting, there are people out there who will do it for you on the internet if you ask. Also, in all cases, here was a case on this Milwaukee where the roof needed to be what's called a Hutchins dry lathing roof. And rather than, if you give it, sometimes if you give a project a little thought, that the Hutchins roof can be created well, let's say cutting that roof that was on the model off and replacing it with another. In this case, just took styrene rod, cut it to length in a chopper, and laid it in between the seam caps that you see down there on the model in the lower left. And to your and the Hudson's roof, on the seam caps at the end of each one, you do have a rivet type look. And I did that. You take the jig in the upper right, it's just a piece of channel laid. So, and then a needle in a pin vise, and you just to set the hole for drilling, or the gap, let's say the hole for drilling. Anyway, and then eventually drill the holes and put the titchy rivets in. And I thought it gave a respectable Hutchins Murphy roof. Now in the kit, uh, the ladders were the Plano etched ladders. And so that is what I used on that IC 36670. As you remember, I said this was a later number change that occurred. The Plano ladders were too long, and ideally you would have wanted to cut them off before you did the bending. However, I did not. So if it happens to you, all you need is a disc and a Dremel tool, and you can shorten them up with no problem. Now, the reason and on the right, you see the Yarmouth ladders. Now, Yarmouth Model Works has closed its doors. And so, but you notice there was a difference that the Plano letters, which also now are supposedly closing its doors, had only 3 tabs on the bend on the style, whereas on the Yarmouth Model Works solid style. So if you look closely at the left photo, you see a little gap on the style where the bend was done. But the reason for doing the ladders is that it then, if you have a prototype photo or a model photo, it allows you to start setting the parts correctly on the model. Such here as you see on the right, the brake step and the brake housing. Once you look at the prototype, you can count the rungs, etc., and it helps in parts placement. There's the bender I use all the time. I have experimented with several that even the manufacturers recommended. I personally don't care for any of them because I feel you don't get a good straight seam. You notice that again, I'll call it the UMM USA bender. You notice it's built like any brake in any metal shop. So once you insert it, and all you got to do is pull the lever up, and you get a beautiful bend each and every single time. And that brake comes in various length if you need longer than this. Happens to be their 4-inch. Also, if you're going to use the etch ladders, you're going to have a jig of some type. And their Yarmouth models had one available. I never purchased one. I built my own out of styrene, and others have done that. If you would be interested in a jig, there's several, I believe, in the files out at Real STMFC on the internet. Anyway, we started with the etched ladders because that's what was in the kit, a mini kit. However, obviously you could use kit ladders. There's a resin type in the upper left, and the only thing with the former kit ladders was that if you use plastic, most were around 20 thousandths. And I like for grab irons and ladder rungs around 10 thousandths, which is close to the prototype. But Intermountain finally came out with the plastic ones you see there in the middle photo, the brown ladders, and they finally got them down to 15 thousandths, which isn't too bad. Now, so on our car, we use the etch ladders, and if you go into many resin kits, again on the right, the styles will be molded onto the resin car, and you will have to drill the holes for the rungs and do it in that method. Then you could do, if you want kit ladders, another way, if you want the 10 thousandths, or let's say the wire rungs, before you put them on the car, you notice on the left, you could drill the holes and put in my case, as I said, I use Tichy Train Group 10 thousandths phosphor brown wire. And I recommend if you do every other rung, it prevents breakage, especially if you do glue them on the car and choose to do it. Then it's best to do it this way. So there's a finished ladder on the bottom, and even if you don't do the ladders on the right, you on once the ladder is on a car, even the kit ladders, you can just drill the holes uh, through the stile into the car body and then sink the ladder of some length. Now you've got a solid mechanical connection, especially on an operating model railroad, that will not come, so the ladder will not come off in operation in the future. Okay, so you now once we have the ladders we had, I normally move on to the roof and I add the running board right away. In the case of the double door car on the RIC car, 6670, and it was easy because the running board in the Intermountain kit is uh, the longitudinal, latitudinal are made up as one mold, and so you just can glue it into place. And I still use Testor's tube cement. At my young age of 79, I started with it many years ago. People complain it's stringy, but the bottom line is it's the same as any liquid. The only thing is the viscosity is a much thicker, and you have to use it very quickly. You can't leave it set, uh, and you won't get the stringiness. But anyway, on a resin kit on the right side, you notice you have the longitudinal and the latitudinal running boards. We're going to call them laterals, as they're called in the hobby by many. They are separate. So you're going to have to form a mount for especially the laterals. You can see two tiny brass uh, under the braces, or brackets under that lateral running board. However, if this was the case, because on this car, the the running boards are wood. However, anytime there's a metal one, I'm a KD fan. I thought KD has just done a wonderful job with their running boards and a lot of their other parts. The thickness is fabulous, and you see one done. I find that it fits almost any 40-foot model if you need to use one. Uh, Obviously, the metal ones are out there from Plano. They were available from Plano and from Yarmouth Model Works. But notice in the lower right, the KD, uh, no more. Once you use one of theirs, the roof grab iron is done for you. The only thing, and the bracket is done for you on the end. You don't have to do any additional work. The only thing is that in that bracket that attaches on the longitudinal running board to the car, that there's two pins on the back made for KD cars. Any other car, you're going to have to take a nipper and cut them off before you put it on the car. Then there's also you'll run into, which this was not the case, but a USRA design in many, let's say, the resin type kits or others, where you notice that the bracket is what's unusual. Also, in most uh, laterals, the running boards they run parallel to the longitudinal running board. In the case of the USRA design, they run, and as you see, they are perpendicular to there. And just, when I was a young guy, first time I ran across this, I thought it was a train miniature kit, and I thought, oh, they messed up the running. Well, as you learn, as you get older, get smarter, you find out it was all correct. It was a USRA design. Anyway, then the other thing that you find in many car kits is that the running boards have pins to make a mechanical connection into the car body. In my case, I cut them all off, okay? But don't throw them away. I glue them into the holes if the manufacturer has drilled them, okay? Then you take a pliers. In this case, it's a square jaw plier, and you squeeze those plastic pins and you form a new roof saddle in that hole. So you notice the lower left, you have the roof saddles. Of course, once you've done that, you got to sand them. And obviously, a piece of sandpaper, put on a board. However, if you want to spend a few bucks, the one Jack Burgess introduced it at an RPM. I think it is a great tool. It's a duo sharp and it has different just like sandpaper, different grits. However, it costs a few more extra bucks. But if you're into resin work at all, it does a wonderful job of being able to sand resin. Also, the wood running boards on older models, many of them were very thick. The newer ones are much better. A typical running board is made from 2x6 lumber, right? So we're talking roughly 20 thousandths. And if you measure a lot of the old running boards, they can be up to 60 thousandths. So if it's plastic, or I will mill them down, and it's not an original idea. Back in '82, Dennis Storzak, who used to be associated with AccuRail, I got to know him through uh, the Sioux Line Historical Society, which he was active in, and I've been a member. Uh, he wrote an article back in '82, and he had a fancy mill set up, which I don't have. So I just took the bit he used, which is a Dremel 199, put it in a Dremel tool, and I made up a jig, which is about 60, 80 thousandths base with 20,000 above it. So you can lay the plastic running board in it. If you run that bit, as you can see, flush over the jig, you now end up with a plastic running board about 20 thousandths. Also, even in the milling process, you got to go slow. You can't go fast because it heats up otherwise, and you will ruin it. But it will end up with, it's not perfectly smooth. To do that, old woodworking technique, single edge razor blade, you scrape the back of it, hold it. It's, remember, you're now at 20,000, so it's quite thin. You got to kind of hold the ends when you scrape, but you can get a really fine surface, and just as if it was the commercial on the machine. Also, obviously, you can use wood ladders if you choose to. You could scratch build them, or again, Yarmouth Model Works and had them. And by the way, for what it's worth, Yarmouth closed its stores, but Speedwich is picking up a lot of the parts, some currently available on eBay for what that's worth. However, and when you attach wood, uh, like if I attach a wood, use a wood running board if I choose to, onto a plastic, I still use Testor's tube cement, which works very well to bond wood to plastic. However, the resin, you have to use like Pacers. I like the Formula 560 canopy glue, which will allow you to also give you a great bond. And to get that bond, obviously, you want that running board to be the longitudinal, especially on the roof raft, to be straight. So take a ruler, and if you're using the canopy glue like on the right, where the wood is being attached to resin, I usually try to do it at the end of a modeling session with the canopy, lay a ruler on it and put some weights on it, let it soak overnight, and I've never had one come loose in all the years. Obviously, to finish off a roof, you need the grab irons, and there are different techniques. The methods I use, obviously, you can see I bend all my own. So the tools are in the upper left. I use a caliper to measure the legs and bend the legs first on a simple plastic jig. But the thing I wanted to show here is really that then I take you can bend your own eye bolts. I do, but I like the Yarmouth ones. They're very well done. You slide once you've got the grab iron bent. You notice it's being held in the tweezer. You slide it onto the bent grab iron. Let gravity put that leg straight for you. Touch it with a drop of CA, and you have, just as if it were preformed for you, a preformed grab iron to attach to the roof. Okay, we move on to the ends quick. We'll go through. Once you got the running board on and a roof grab iron, the first thing is I normally go to the ends because I have to put the running board brackets onto that longitudinal running board. In this case, we use the etch ones, which you see on the car on the left. You can also see it a little bit closer on the right there. Then you have obviously the Intermountain provided the brake housing. The brake step came from resin in the kit. The brake step brackets, I use them on most models on the brake step. And the Tichy out of their AB set 3013, I think they're fantastic. Okay. And the resin, like if you're doing a resin kit, I think they're worthless. You break most of them trying to even cut them out. And even if you do get them cut out and sanded, they'll normally break in a little bit. Somebody, if you touch the end of the car, you know, then the retainer valve also, it can be, it's in the Tichy 3013 set. Otherwise, there are resin ones you see on the right, and that happens to be a Tichy on the right on that top car, top photo. That is the Ajax housing, and then you get the like Yarmouth put out the etched bracket at the brake steps, and down below, if you remember, I said I like using KD parts. Now, when you have a metal running board, we don't on the car we're working, but if you did, you end up, especially on reefers, you can't use the laterals, right? So you cut them off. Well, you don't want to throw them away. You put them in the parts box. And here, like, so when you have a car that has a metal running board, you can make the brake step then yourself by taking one of those laterals you cut off for a reefer and recut it to size, and you have a nice running board. Okay, then you got obviously on the car on the left, you have the brake rod. I use 15 thousandths. Bell crank is on the bottom. Uh, this came out of the Tichy set. Now you notice on the bell there are different bell crank. uh, The way to attach the clevis. Okay, the brake rod attaches obviously running down from the bell housing, the chain. The brake rod runs into a clevis that attaches to that bell crank. Now you can do the top photo. You notice I used the bottom of the inner mountain uh, brake rod, which was in plastic, cut it away, and attached the brass, uh, the new fiberglass. I'm sorry, brake rod to that clevis. Also, you can do another method is to the Tichy, same one on the lower left, right photo. You see there's the Tichy bell crank, but in this case, on the brake rod, attached a turnbuckle, the Tichy 8021, and then just slide it over the bell crank. So there's several ways if it's car has a bell crank system that you can attach the brake rod to it. Then you have the brake step. I just threw that one in the upper left because it with a vertical, you end up with a ratchet and pawl on the brake step, which you want showing over on the right. Threw that in just because, again, their Plano did beautiful brake steps. They did them, however, in stainless steel, but I hope that somebody picks those up because that I thought was some of the finest brake strips we had as modelers on the market. And he did all the various types in stainless steel. The bottom left photo is if you remember on many models, especially like the old Athearn, but many manufacturers later, the brake chain is molded on the car. Now, if you want a fancier look and look of like you've done a lot of detail work, you take a drill, chuck it into in my case, a Dremel tool, and you run in behind through in between the ribs, and you run that drill in. Now you'll have a chain that looks like you've added it as a separate complete part. Then we obviously also the last way you could do it, you can make your own brake steps. As you see on the left, that is Evergreen 8102 1x2 strip string, and so are the angle brackets. However, if you want to get a little fancier, like a lot of the etched ones and a lot of cars had, you could use a plastic struck 364th degree angle, and instead of just the flat on that longitudinal running board a bracket. On the right, I just threw that in because not on all cars, as you do those running board brackets, run down straight. There are, as you can see, those V into the center. Then at the bottom photo, if you really want to get fancy, now if you look carefully at that uh, bracket on the left photo at the top, you notice the car had molded on pieces where you really would attach the bottom of the bracket. When you put the sterine on straight yourself, and you notice that's what I'm doing there, and you did in that bottom photo. You put it on straight, then you put a blade in a micro blade in a micro scalpel, and you touch that end it was straight, and you will create the two fastening points that would have been on the prototype. A final thing is that sometimes we talked about there's a belt crank on in the Sioux line. If you're a Sioux line fan, they actually had a geared system that the brake shaft went into. And there you see a photo of it on the left. And on the right are a couple of photos showing my attempt to model that on some of the Sioux Line cars. Okay, we move on. You got the brake wheel, and the brake wheel itself is before, obviously, you have to originally, we had the brake housing, remember, on our car on the left side there was provided by Intermountain. However, on the model manufacturer in general, on majority of all the kits, provides you the Ajax type housing, which if you see the Moloko, that is the first one at the top on the left side. However, in our case, on our car that we're looking at and building, we wanted a universal. Now, in this case, it's right below on the Moloko. It's right below the Ajax, and if you compare that to our car, the 36670, Intermountain in this case did a real nice job of molding that, in my opinion. But the other purpose here of showing this is that, many times if you know what the brake gear is based on part diagram or other information, Moloko, you can change that brake housing to match your brake wheel if you want. And of course, the brake wheels, Intermountain again, is my number one choice, but there's also Precision Scale, and now Tangent has hit the field, and they're doing a wonderful job. Theirs are absolutely superb too. We hit the sides, and now you have on the sides, obviously, is the first normal thing is the grab irons. I happen to bend all my own with a simple jig, as you see they're pictured on the top right, and it's simply a piece of string 40 thousandths, and I use a caliper to measure whatever the grab iron is, and measure it from the edge, drill a hole, and bend accordingly, right angles, and you end up with a straight grab iron. And if you look at the lower left, those are drop grabs. And to do it, once you bending straight grabs or commercial ones, if you need to make a drop grab, I simply use a duckbill plier that has the green tape, which you insert the straight grab into it, just a little ways, close it, bend the legs over, and you have a drop grab. Also, you remember that USA bender? George Tillman is using that to bend his drop grabs. So if you happen to buy that tool and you get into etched ladders, another use for it would be to make drop grabs. Then you have, you get into, oh, and by the way, the other thing was that if you look at that upper left photo, you start to look at other features on the side of a car. That one particularly you see had corner brackets, okay? But the other thing is on our car, uh, safety appliances, or the handhold, there, the second grab iron, it was required as of 1932. And for grab irons, again, the bracket type grab, which we have to have on our car, or that's what the photos show. I, again, am a big fan of the KD ones. And so this car on ours, I happen to use the 2251, which you see there, to put that on. Yarmouth Models made a jig. Now, I want to say that I got this idea from an Intermountain car years ago. They do not drill four holes. They only drill two, the upper right and the lower left. And I think they are onto a great idea. The reason being is if you use all four holes, as KD put on their grabs, the jig, you have to be very accurate. And even with the drilling of the holes, it can be hard to straighten that grab iron and keep it perfect, get it as straight as you can. So on the KD grab, if you cut off the lower right and the upper left with a jig, you can stick it right into the Intermountain holes, which was done here. It also gives you wiggle room to allow you to play with that bracket grab a little bit to get it really straight. And so I use that on most models, just two holes to allow a little wiggle room. Also, you notice on the lower right, on the end of a car, once they're in a train, you don't see that end. KD makes some fancy brackets you can buy, or you could use a bracket grab. But rather than that, I use the manufacturer's bracket grab and just cut off the handhole portion and replace it with phosphorus brown wire 10,000. And I think, you get a good looking bracket grab. Also, once you're on the side, the car we specifically are looking at, the IC double door, it in the mini kit, the sill needs changing, and the sill required you cut out a pattern out of the resin which is supplied for you, that sill. And rather than futz with cutting it out and trying to sand it and get everything perfectly square, I chose instead, I looked at it and said, why not use styrene? So you notice the top portion of it, using the measurements from the resin one that I didn't use. It was 030 by 60, which is a evergreen strip 133, and then 100 by 135 for the lower portion. And all you do is, and they glue, because we're using the car body is intermountain plastic, they glue right on. I happen to use MEK, and you get nice straight lines right away without futzing and sanding and etc. Extra work. So we had to change the sill. We added the double doors. That required that with a double door. So the intermountain body is for a single car door. So once you add double door, you have to add the door guides on the left side. Evergreen 1x3, 8103. They were made out of. Then other things you do end up usually doing on the side, many cars as you upper right, that our IC has to say all of them, you have toe loops. You can do them commercially or bend your own. By the way, for bending most of this, like a toe loop, I like the Xuron bending plier. It has really nice fine points. And then you see up there in that upper right, there's a couple of little black dots are on sill steps, which sill steps, I like the A line. They have all three types, a series style A, B, and C. There's another rumor out there that A line is going to close its doors. I don't know if that's true or not, but I've picked that rumor up. So I've been trying to stock a little of some of their parts. But anyway, the sill steps you see, then the metal fasteners, I do them with MEK goop. Uh, Many of the guys like the Collada and Tomans, they drill a hole and they do them with brass pin. I have never messed with much of that. It's a lot of work and a lot of time. Anyway, and then lower lefts on the sides. Once you got doors on, you end up with placards. If you want to do the door handles molded, cut them off, end up with put in wire ones. Uncoupling levers. Now we go back to we basically got most of the car under control, except I do not, when I do the end work, I usually leave uncoupling levers on purpose till the end when I'm about ready to paint. Reason being, I have a tendency to catch them, or I use a lot of uh, just foam, out of the box for my holding the cars, etc. And they easily catch on that. So I normally wait till the end, and I bend my own. Our particular car, the IC double R 36670, needs the East style rotary, and the photo of it is down on the lower left. You'll see the diagram for that type is on the lower right. My I That's the CalScale sheet. If any of you assembled, get the CalScale AB sets. They come in there. I use them for years, but nowadays it's mostly all Tichy rather than CalScale. But that sheet that CalScale used to put in there is outstanding with a lot of good notes and a lot of good measurements that the prototype had. You see, my diagrams are on that sheet. Also, that my dimensions that I use as a standard for all cars. But so I bend my own uncoupling levers. Okay, Now, the way to attach normally an uncoupling lever is the oldest method standard is an eye bolt. And I bend them and I use the Tichy again. I happen to make my first, I bend the uncoupling levers out of phosphorus 012, 12 and a half thousandths phosphorus brown wire. The eye bolts I bend out of 10 thousandths if I'm going to do it. You can attach that eye bolt, as you notice in the upper two photos, on the outside of the car. However, another way to do it is to attach it in the bottom, which may be a little bit easier with because of the polling pocket. If it's on the model with the plate, you can just drill it and put it in the bottom, bend it forward, and you get a similar look. One way of doing it. But that simple eye bracket, there's many ways to really do that for the uncoupling lever. You notice branch line trains on the upper left photo did a wonderful job for us. Most of the time, we're cutting parts off on a model and replacing them. Not in this case. You notice it's there. It has a hole in it, and the reason being is for their uncoupling lever. However, in our case, if I were to, when I do a branch line trains model, that hole becomes the eye bolt location for attaching the uncoupling. To the right, you have what you find in many resin kits. That little part, when I first encountered it years ago, I thought, what is this? I had no idea what it was. Asked a couple other bottlers. They didn't know what it was. So I had to go to Frank Udita and say, Frank, what is this? And Frank said, well, you dummies, that's an uncoupling lever bracket. So anyway, I know what it is today. As we get older and wiser, maybe our education, our knowledge grows a little bit. Then in the lower left, another method that I first was introduced to me that I caught was in Ed Retchwich. He took a piece of 60 evergreen 60 thousandths angle and glued it in place. Then you take a nibbler or, excuse me, and go ahead and shape it. And I think it does a really nice, effective job, and it's very close to the etch type, which you can buy if you want and fold. Those etched ones from Yarmouth Model Works, if they're going to be available, if you do buy them and attempt to use them, they are extremely delicate, and you have one shot at the bends. And if I myself on the last model I did, I have to admit I bent three of them, and they broke all three of them right away. So they're very delicate, and you have to be very careful in the bending process. Of course, then we get to the underbody, and in the underbody, you have the brake components, that you add. Now we're going to skip the ones I have here. I have 8 items here, but the ones with the dashes, we'll get into a little more detail. Then you have the piping. My standard is 3/4 inch. If it's a 3/4 inch pipe, as that from the air reservoir to the control or AB valve or control valve, 10 thousandths wire. The back of the brake cylinder, which is normally a 1 inch rod, as well as the brake rods. Then I use 12 and a half thousandths phosphor bronze wire for those. The fence that usually on the brake cylinder piston to attach it to the brake lever, and you have the chain which attaches to the brake rod going to the B end. You can either A-line 40 links per chain, 40 links per inch black, or in this case, use precision scale 34 links per inch. Both are very effective, look great. Now, then the other thing, the dirt collector for the IC double door came from the Tichy set. I think it's one of the finest there is available, and I like it, and I use it much cheaper than precision scales, which I think some of theirs, they got a couple of them plastic and metal or brass, and I think they're a little bit clunkier. But anyway, and you also see that on the lower photo, I always mold I set the brakes and put them on the model in the release position. So it's just, I feel that most of the time we're running trains, they'd be in the release position. Now the cross bearers, if you look carefully at the top photo, and the bottom photo, they're slightly different. And the reason being is that if remember I said that using the Intermountain car body is a single door. So the cross bearers in that upper left photo have to be moved to the left and to the right where the cross ties are located. And the cross ties located there have to be moved to where the cross bearers are. So you see the change from the upper left to the lower right. Now the cross ties are in the door. And the reason for this change is that the cross bearers on most cars are located where at the door ends. So that going from a single door, double door, we have to change the underframe if we want it to match the prototype to be out at the end of the double door car. Also, if you notice back on that upper left photo, the molded parts that for the locating the brake components, I normally eliminate those right away, and you see they were gone in the lower right. And the way I've done that years ago, when ribside cars came out, I did a couple of presentations with showing removal of them. And so this is the process I still use. It's a matter of old woodworking technique. Again, I use that saw blade and Dremel tool, and it's like I said, 5,000 RPM. You put your thumb up against the chuck, you can get it down to about a 3,000 or even less RPM. The thing about it, if you're afraid, and I have friends that actually will not do this because they're afraid of that saw blade. Because yes, if you are not careful, you will get a nasty cut, obviously, from that blade. If you want to give it a try, they do make covers if you use a dermal tool to cover that saw blade. So it would not be open and exposed. Anyway, once you get all the curves cut, you see in the lower left, then it's a matter of I took a dental tool, which they make a lot of flat, and take that out. You see in the middle photo, you can use it. This case, it was also removing. We had the underframe needed change, so with a lot of curves, you remove one of the cross ties. It's done there in the same photo on the right side, and the final look is over on the left. This method I've used for years and years. It's effective. If you find others that are more effective for you, use them. Yeah, and what I threw this in for is if you're interested in anything about the brake systems and modeling them, Gene Green at one of the RPMs did a wonderful presentation, which you can download this. I made it into a book, as you can see here. It is available on, again, Real STMFC in the files section, and you can download it. And like I mentioned, modeling the brakes in the release position. That's one of and he covers all the parts, all various types. So anything you'd like to know, if you're not going to get into a car builder's or prototype, this is a book to have in your collection. Now, remember I said a couple of things we'd cover greater detail. Here are the brake levers. I make my own. I used CalScale for years. Then Collada and RMC came out with, he made some out of evergreen, he mentioned. And I thought, wow, hey, that's a great idea. And so, and if you want true dimensions, like I just said, those are the ones in the lower right out of Gene Green's book. Or the lazy way of doing it is you take one of the manufacturers, you lay them on a piece of paper, and you just trace around them and then make a center point, which you need. If you look at the prototype, lower right, that hole in the center. And that's your marking point. Then you use a razor blade, a single edge razor blade, and cut off slivers, as you can barely see them there on the screen, but they're there. And you can make your own brake levers. I do this now quite a bit. The floating lever, 1x6, also known as the fulcrum lever in the Gene Green book. And also among in the prototype, many of the car guys refer to them as the dead lever. And then you get the cylinder lever. That's always that's made out of evergreen 1x8. Okay, we get to the underbody. You also got the train line. That in more greater detail on this photo, upper left, you see it in the green where it was made with fluoro wire. And I modeled the 1.5-inch train line. So I used, ideally it would be 19 thousandths, but that's pretty difficult to get today. So I just gone to 20 thousandths. If you model the inch and a quarter, it'd be 15 thousandths. And here's where you can see two different ways also of doing clevises on the brake rods. The upper left photo, you'll see they're done with Tichy turnbuckle 8021. Now, I also just make them, my wonderful MEK goop that I use. I was in that, I picked that up from many years ago when we went from building wood kits to Serene. L. Armitage recommended it. Start just melting kit sprues into MEK. Of course, California, it causes cancer, so you got to be careful. You can't get it in California, but anywhere else, it's readily available, usually in your paint stores. And you notice, so I make the fasteners. My wonderful tool is simply fine radio wire on a toothpick, and you can see the upper, you got your tissue part if you choose to do it. Lower right made with MEK goop. I also threw in, when you do the train lines on many models, the holes are not there for the train line. You can go to some of the drill manufacturers, Master McCar, I'm not, which one is correct? Anyway, they have a 6-inch. However, inexpensive way is take a piece of hardware. I happen to use 32 thousandths, or they called it piano wire years ago. Sharpen it up, and again, you have to hold it when you turn the Dremel on in this case, or it will turn into a whip, and again, could give you a severe lash in on the hand or finger. So you got to hold it when you turn it on. But once you lay it, you can drill then the holes easily for a train line. The other thing is on some models on your fish belly center sills, you have to, the brake levers pass into or through the fish belly center sill. Those holes sometimes are opened by the manufacturer, sometimes they are not. If they are not, you could drill them. I like to then use a broach to finish them up and open them. The broach is a tool, as you can see, upper right and lower. It cuts on the back on the those teeth that are on there, cuts on the backstroke, and it does a wonderful job in opening up small holes like that. Another great use for it is if you are cleaning out stake pockets on kits, it will do a great job there. Then finish. This is we get into the finish of a car. Many times you want to just change the number or take a herald off. Uh, a lot of people, Sulfaset is one way, isopropyl alcohol, lower right. You could use a fat toothpick. I prefer a scratch brush. Uh, in the upper right, the red, it's a Euro tool. You can buy it. Micromart has them. The nylon bristles, and you have to go very light, but you can remove numbers, any type, usually lettering, and not ruin the paint. Okay, obviously, this car that we've been following through, we now have built because it has all the parts added. I like to have a uniform color for the final coat of the car. So I have changed over for many years. I painted with Floqual, then went to Polyscale, which was water-based Floqual rather than solvent, and that went away. Now I'm using Vallejo, and Vallejo. This was airbrushed with Vallejo surface primer. And obviously, if you're a water-based paint today, there are other out there. I did it, and the reason I got into them is because I start reading. I was taking a solvent-based paint was taking me 5 to 7 days to air dry. All of a sudden, I found I could models in the magazines. They were saying they were building models in a couple days. Well, what they were doing is using water-based paint, which dries very quickly. Anyway, Vallejo comes in two types, and they say one is for hand brushing, one is for air brush. I think that's bunk. Okay, when that Model Air sits on a hobby shop shelf or at the distributor warehouse before it gets, I have purchased some that are very thick and they need to be thinned. And don't go by anybody who says that model color brushing paint can't be thin. They thin out exactly the same. Okay. As for once you get in your to mix the paint, you shake it by hand, obviously. I used to use a Hobart shaker, but George Tillman, who's he's a tool junkie, kind of like I am. He ran across this one that's used in the uh, medical industry, and that top is for test tubes, but it works wonderful because it creates a vortex inside the bottle and mixes paint fast, quickly, very efficiently compared to the Hobart, which I used for years, or doing it any other way. The only thing about my Vallejo paints that becomes a problem for many modelers, they don't come in railroad colors. So if you're you're gonna probably have to make up drift cards, as I've done here. It works on 3x5 cards or styrene, either one. You notice then you're going to have to do airbrushing. It's nice to have some type of way to mount the model. Again, Joe Benish soldered up the one I use. That goes back to the Craftsman in July of '97. You see, lower left, because I like to add my trucks and couplers, and I'm lazy and I don't want to take them off. Uh, I just built a piece of block of wood, as you see, my own type stand, and it's just cardboard. Drop the model in, throw the tape over the couplers, and once I get the underbody airbrushed, uh, then from then on, all the coats go on in this manner, in this way. Airbrush, there are many on the market. You have to choose. My favorite is Pache Talon. Uh, that's the one in the upper left on that group. The lower one is an H because when I went from solvent paint to the water-based paint, the first models I painted were absolute crap. They were junk, and I had to restrip and repaint, and the Badger was clogging. That Pache Talon, they have three size needles, and for water-based paint, you want the number 7, the largest possible. But anyway, in my case, after messing up a few models, Jeff Wilson put out a wonderful book, and he recommended try using the H brush. So I bought it, started playing with that. A lot of modelers paint with that today and get great results. I just happen to like the gravity feed because on most models you don't need very much paint. And I also paint booth is on the right, as you can see. I acquired mine in '83. It's moved 3 houses, and it does the job for me. Lower that when I talked airbrush, I said I use the Pache Talon. Down in that lower one, I have, being a tool junkie too, I had to try a couple of the others. I had that one, the front one is the Badger Patriot, and Badger claims one needle does it all, solvent or water based. I tend to disagree with that, and I'll let you decide on your own if you test. If you're going to use the Iwata, which is the back one, in that, I recommend you use the number 5 needle. They have various needle sizes. I recommend the number 5 for water-based paints. Then we have our car painted. In this case, it was painted with Polyscale Wisconsin Central Maroon. The sheets that on the cars said that the IC used a maroon type paint at this time. So I still had the Wisconsin Central Maroon, and that's what I used. Then over it went gloss coat, in this case, Vallejo gloss varnish for decal, underbody, the black. The decal process, my method you see of doing decals is in the photo in the upper left. A bubble pack just to hold distilled water, cut the decals out, and decals themselves, there we just lost again national scale car out of Canada, very thin film decals. Many of us will have a supply of the old KD. The newest decals out there, or the latest manufacturer, I use the K4 a lot now, and he's doing a wonderful job of producing like Champion did for many different models. Obviously, in the lower right, I threw that in because if you want to just do a number change, you're on old models. When we began, they didn't have the end numbers, so dry transfer lettering applied to scrap decal sheets or new decal paper. Cover it up with micro scale, the decal film, and it makes a wonderful water slide decal equivalent to any of the others like a Champ or whatever. Obviously, at my age, like I say, I'm a wonderful young 79 now. So I have a trouble reading a lot of those fine decals, the print, and I've experimented with many different methods. The glasses I found that work for me the best, I can actually even read the repack dates with them, is the NK glasses out of Micromart. I found them, they're not bad, they work good. And for cutting a decal out, I used to use a number 11 blade, X-Acto, changed over scalpels. But eventually I found that what it is, and if you put that cut under a microscope, it actually creates two ridges on the decal on the side of the cut. Therefore, if you have a sharp scissors, it does not do that. These are the scissors, the ones here, they are really surgeon's suture scissors they use. And they were introduced by Champion Decal Company when Rich Meyer was the owner of many. He's now, of course, passed on. May he rest in peace. And they do a wonderful job. Micromart introduced one they call the Twizzlers. And so I have never tried them, but you may, if you want, experiment with them. Our car that we've been following, our IC double door is now in paint. Here you see the various sides. The decals are on. Then we, of course, notice it's very new looking, and I like to weather the cars for the railroad. I use pan pastels, which you see there prior, and I used for years and years eyeshadow. Um, I really, in my opinion, uh, have now using pan pastels. I think the two products are really similar, and so that's my opinion. Anyway, the weathered car, the pan pastels used, we won't go over each one. They're in the upper right hand corner. Since this is being taped, you could look then eventually at the recording of it and blow that up. We'll take a look. But here you see the weathered car as we did. It's now on the railroad, and which if you look at my blog now and then, I like to show the car in service on the railroad. Here, this particular car is sitting at the team track at my Bass Lake Junction. And then there's just a couple more things I wanted to show you. Uh, for years, you notice that lower photo. And I said I like to use the Katie bracket grab. For bracket grabs, I use the Katie ones, but that wonderful sprue or gate, as I've been told I should be, is the proper terminology. That gate, for years I've wondered, what could you do with it? Obviously, that part sticking out, the handle type thing, makes a wonderful chimney on a structure. But then that lower thing, I always wondered what could be done with. Well, when I had to do the Sioux line reefer and I was doing it, if you notice in the upper left, that ice bunker drain, those pipes, they're quite large and quite thick. And I finally, and gosh, I was so excited at the workbench because I could finally find a use for that KD sprue cutting. If you notice those drain pipes for the ice bunkers for that car, you see them attached on the upper on the right side, and also there was MEK goop used around to. They were attached quickly with a tiny drop of goo, and then the plastic filled in around them to create a permanent hold. The other thing I want just here is last year also, for what it's worth, uh, Resin Car Works. Frank had this hopper out, that kit for the NP. Also the Sioux line, it was the Enterprise hopper. And the purpose is not, but the purpose is that lower right corner. A lot of people, I get asked, my God, working on that hopper, there's so little room in there for putting the piping, the detail. What? Don't put it, do it in there. Do it as a subassembly, as you see on the lower right. You can, if you lay out your measurements, whether it be on a piece of paper or whatever, you make yourself a diagram and you do it as a subassembly before the end braces are put on. You slide it in, or even with end braces, you can slide maneuver it in and do it that way. And so there it is. We have covered my methods that I use for constructing plastic and resin models. And there you see more of it, obviously. And we shall see if we stop sharing.
Very nice.
I
Thanks,
have-
Lester.
I
Hey,
have just
we got
one,
time for a few questions or not?
I
Yeah, we
have
got
just
time.
one, I have just one comment on Lester's excellent presentation. When using water slide decals, always use distilled
Agree.
water.
Yep, distilled water, absolutely. Agree. Tap water can have many residues in it
Minerals and stuff like that that you don't even know are there.
and people then get cloudy decals and they
Yep.
wonder why. And it's because of the minerals or the residue that was in that water that we think we drink and we think it's great, but that's going in our bodies.
Well, your bodies need some of that.
Right. It can process it. Correct. Anything else, anybody?
Lester,
You used a lot of Katy parts, which are Delrin. What do you use to glue that Delrin to the styrene car body?
I actually use most of the time just Tester's tube cement. And if you feel uncomfortable that you feel that's not going to give you the bond you want, I go back. My applicator for that is a needle with the eye cut in half, put into a wood dowel as an applicator, and I will go back and you touch at each of your attaching points, the saddles, the roof saddles, and you might put a little bit of CA. And again, I have never had them come loose after putting them on in that method. Now, another way you can do it, and very effective, if you don't want to do it with this tube cement, is use the the canopy glue, and that formula. I use the Pacer Formula 560. There are others out there. If you use that, put a weight on it, let it soak overnight. That is also a very effective and will hold really well.
Very good. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you for being here.
when you Lester, when you use those NK glasses, you it looks like they have adjustments for each eye to
They
focus
do.
and all that. So
They
you don't
do.
have to, you don't wear your glasses or anything. You just
No.
put those straight up.
No, you just don't. I played with many pair, okay, of different. Like I say, I'm a junkie when it comes to the toolbox. So, and as I've gotten older, obviously, I had trouble starting to read, especially repack dates. And yeah, I've tried loops, and a lot of it they did not work well. These glasses for if you got to tilt, the decal or whatever, but you get the right light with them. And for what it's worth, they work for me. I can't guarantee, that they'd work for you, but they do
Right.
work well for me.
Great.
And they have the power to read. Like I say clearly, you take it was National Scale car, the decals that Speedwich used to do with the really fine print, and he sold it off the National Scale car. Those decals with these glasses, I can read the repack dates.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you very much, Lester.
Okay.
Excellent job as always. And thanks everybody for joining us. I'm going to be out of town next week, but I am planning to do this from my hotel room. And we have Ken Huff, who is going to be talking about the Pullman Betterment Program. And so we look forward to that. And we'll see you next Thursday. Have a great night.
All
Great.
right.
Happy
Thank
Halloween,
you.
guys.
Happy Halloween.
All right.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.